The game begins with the English opening. Nepomniachtchi plays pawn to c4, and Carlsen responds with pawn to e6, signaling a calm, strategic start. White develops with pawn to g3, preparing to fianchetto the bishop. Black strikes in the center with pawn to d5, immediately challenging White's control. Bishop to g2 completes the fianchetto setup, aiming down the long diagonal. But Carlsen surprises with pawn to d4. This unusual thrust advances the d-pawn deep into White's territory, creating a space advantage and forcing Nepomniachtchi to react. Black could have simply exchanged on c4, but Carlsen prefers to create imbalance early. Knight to f3 develops a piece and attacks the advanced d4 pawn. Black responds with knight to c6, protecting the pawn and developing smoothly. White castles kingside, getting the king to safety. Carlsen deploys bishop to c5, an aggressive square that eyes the f2 weakness and keeps options open. Pawn to d3 from White attacks the d4 pawn, trying to undermine Black's central wedge. Black brings out the knight to f6, developing and adding pressure to the center. Knight from b1 to d2 reinforces the center and prepares to challenge Black's setup. Carlsen pushes pawn to a5, a prophylactic move on the queen side, preventing White's expansion there. Knight to b3 attacks the bishop on c5, forcing a decision. Black retreats the bishop to e7, a solid square that keeps all pieces coordinated. Pawn to e3, Nepomniachtchi strikes at the d4 pawn, offering to open lines in the center. Carlsen accepts the challenge with pawn takes e3, removing the pawn and maintaining material balance. White could have delayed this confrontation, but the immediate exchange aims to activate pieces and clarify the structure. Bishop takes e3 recaptures, placing the bishop on an active central square. Black plays knight to g4, attacking the bishop and creating threats on the king side. The bishop retreats to c5, maintaining central influence and avoiding exchanges. Carlsen castles kingside, completing development and securing his king. Pawn to d4 advances in the center, establishing a strong pawn duo and claiming space. Black responds with pawn to a4, pushing the queenside pawn forward and creating play on that flank. Bishop takes e7 exchanges off Black's solid bishop, simplifying the position slightly. Queen takes e7 recaptures, keeping the queen centralized and flexible. Knight to c5 occupies a strong outpost on the 5th rank, coordinating with the center pawns. Carlsen pushes pawn to a3, driving the knight's potential retreat and gaining queenside space. Pawn takes a3 captures the advanced pawn, opening the b file for potential activity. Black plays rook to d8, activating the rook on the open file and preparing counterplay. Knight retreats to b3, repositioning away from Black's threats. Carlsen brings the knight back to f6, centralizing it and maintaining flexibility. Rook to e1 places the rook on the open e file, adding pressure down the center. Carlsen responds with queen takes a3, snatching the loose pawn and activating the queen on the queen side. White could have defended the pawn with rook a2, but that would have been passive. Instead, Nepomniachtchi allows the pawn capture, prioritizing piece activity over material. Queen to e2 centralizes the queen, connecting rooks and preparing to coordinate with the pieces. Black plays pawn to h6, creating luft for the king and preventing back-rank tricks. Pawn to h4 advances on the king side, gaining space and potentially preparing a pawn storm. Carlsen develops the bishop to d7, connecting rooks and preparing to reroute pieces. Knight to e5 jumps into a central outpost, attacking pieces and dominating the board. Black responds with bishop to e8, a quiet retreat that reorganizes the bishop for future deployment. Queen to e3 keeps the queen centralized and supports the knight on e5. Carlsen shifts his queen to b4, attacking the d4 pawn and creating threats on the queen side. Rook from e1 to b1, an unusual rook shift that attacks the queen and prepares to double rooks on the b file. Black responds with knight takes e5, exchanging the powerful knight and reducing White's central control. Nepomniachtchi could have simply moved the rook to c1, but rook e1 to b1 is more forcing, directly challenging Black's queen and maintaining initiative. Pawn takes e5 recaptures the knight, maintaining the pawn chain and opening lines. Carlsen plays knight to g4, relocating the knight to an active square and eyeing the e3 square. Queen to e1 prepares to trade queens and simplify the position. Black plays queen takes e1 check, forcing the trade and giving check in the process. Rook takes e1 recaptures the queen, entering an endgame. Carlsen pushes pawn to h5, fixing White's kingside pawns and limiting pawn breaks. Bishop takes b7. Nepomniachtchi captures the b7 pawn with the bishop, grabbing material and activating the piece. Black responds with rook to a4, activating the rook on the 4th rank and attacking the c4 pawn. White could have played rook to d1, consolidating, but bishop takes b7 seizes material and puts immediate pressure on black's position. Pawn to c5 advances the passed pawn, creating threats on the queen side. Carlsen plays pawn to c6, blocking the pawn's advance and stabilizing the structure. Pawn to f3 kicks the knight from g4, clearing the e-file and preparing to consolidate. Black plays knight to h6, repositioning the knight to the rim but avoiding exchanges. Rook to e4 activates the rook on the 4th rank, creating threats along the rank. Carlsen responds with rook to a7, attacking the bishop and activating his own rook. Rook to b4 shifts the rook to the b-file, preparing to support the passed pawn. Black plays rook to b8, doubling rooks on the b-file and defending the back rank. Pawn to a4 pushes the a-pawn forward, creating a passed pawn and threatening to advance further. Carlsen responds with rook from a7 takes b7, capturing the bishop and eliminating white's strongest piece. Nepomniachtchi could have played knight to d7, attacking the rook, but pawn to a4 generates immediate threats with the passed pawn, forcing black to react. Rook to b6 attacks the c6 pawn and supports the passed pawn. Black plays rook takes b6, exchanging rooks and simplifying the position. Pawn takes b6 recaptures, creating a far advanced passed pawn on b6. Carlsen recaptures with rook takes b6, keeping the rook active and stopping the pawn. Knight to c5 attacks the rook and the e6 pawn, creating dual threats. Black plays knight to f5, centralizing the knight and defending the pawn. Pawn to a5 advances the passed pawn, just 2 squares from promotion. Carlsen responds with rook to b8, repositioning the rook to stop the pawn from behind. Pawn to a6 pushes the passed pawn to the 6th rank, 1 square from queening. Carlsen plays knight takes g3, capturing the g3 pawn and activating the knight with threats. Nepomniachtchi could have pushed knight to d7 attacking the rook, but pawn to a6 is the most forcing move, threatening immediate promotion and putting maximum pressure on black. Knight to a4, a surprising retreat that clears the path for the a-pawn and prepares knight to c5 to support it. Carlsen plays pawn to c5, desperately trying to create counterplay by pushing his own passed pawn. White's pawn is just 1 move away from the 7th rank, creating serious practical threats. However, the position remains complex and difficult to navigate. Nepomniachtchi could have also played rook to a2 here, but knight to a4 is more forcing because it immediately threatens knight takes c5, removing black's only defensive resource. Despite white's advanced passed pawn creating practical dangers, the position is objectively very challenging for white to convert. Pawn to a7. The pawn reaches the 7th rank, just 1 square from promotion. Carlsen plays rook to d8, trying to stop the pawn from behind. The a-pawn creates a serious threat, forcing white's next move. Black could have tried knight to e2 check, forcing the king to move, but after king to h1, the position remains extremely complicated. This moment marks the culmination of Nepomniachtchi's relentless pawn push, creating maximum practical chances in a difficult endgame. Knight takes c5, the knight captures the advanced pawn, and Carlsen plays rook to a8, attacking the a7 pawn and creating serious counterplay. The position has become incredibly sharp, with both sides having advanced passed pawns. White must find precise moves to coordinate the knight and defend the a7 pawn, while black's pieces create threats. The game continues with extreme complications, where both players must calculate carefully. This was a hard-fought endgame by both players, with Nepomniachtchi creating practical chances with his passed pawn despite the objective evaluation. A tense and dramatic World Championship game.